Hi, Matt. Thank you very much for joining us today. How are things in Sydney?
Very nice. The water's great, and it's good to be here with you today.
Thank you. You're typically based in London, but you're in Sydney. What is going on there? What brings you to Australia?
So over 70% of our shareholders are based in Australia. So I've taken the opportunity to come down here and meet with them in both Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, and also to present the Euro Manganese story to, additional funds down here.
Matt, before we do a deep dive on Euro Manganese, why don't we start with the very basics? Explain how manganese is used in the lithium-ion battery.
So manganese, or high purity manganese, is used in the cathode in the chemistry. So nickel, cobalt, manganese are the main cathode metals. Manganese is a small but very essential part of those cathode chemistries. Nickel is the main metal, and manganese stabilizes the nickel, similar to the role that actually cobalt does. What we're seeing though is manganese is significantly lower cost than the other battery metals. So we're seeing more manganese being included in the content of the batteries, which allows them to decrease the cost of the battery, making the electric vehicles more affordable.
You've already touched on this, but I just want to clarify one point. There is a big difference between manganese and high purity manganese. Can you just repeat or tell us again what the significance is between the two?
Over 90% of the manganese that's mined today goes into the steel making in terms of ferroalloys. About 8% is further refined into a high purity form, but that's like fertilizer grade or technology, some technology applications. It's only about 1% of the manganese that's refined into what we call ultra pure manganese, where the purity is like 99.95%, and that's the high purity manganese that ends up in the batteries. It's the impurities which are really important to get them really, really low, because that relates to the safety issues of battery shorts if there are too many impurities in there. Today, over 95% of the high purity manganese for batteries is processed in China. There's no capacity in North America, and in Europe there's only a very small amount produced, like 2,000 tons per annum. There's some high purity metal produced in South Africa, about 28,000 tons. Just to put that into context, our plant, which will be the only plant with its own source of production in Europe, is aiming to produce 50,000 tons per annum.
Matt, let's move on now and discuss your project, which is in the Czech Republic. And the Czech Republic is not a country we associate with mining. Is there a strong mining industry in the country? And if so, how supportive is the government to mining?
Yeah, so there is mining today in the Czech Republic. It's mainly coal mining, but it has a long history of mining in the Czech Republic. It's actually where a lot of its wealth came from. About a third of the silver that was produced in Europe in the mid-centuries came from actually very close to the region where we are. And the town's crest actually has a hammer and a pick on it. So the current government is a business-friendly, sort of slightly to right of centre government, and that was voted in only about 18 months ago, and they are very supportive of us in terms of the actual, as is the local municipality, all very supportive of the project.
Matt, one of the interesting features of Euro Manganese is that you will not be actually mining the metal in a traditional sense, but rather be producing it from the tailings of a past producing mine. Can you just expand on this, please?
The past producing mine operated between 1950 and 1970s. It was a pyrite mine, and they used that to produce sulfuric acid. They didn't take manganese from that mine, and therefore there's now a very large 27 million tons historical tailings area that has manganese very evenly dispersed throughout it. It's a carbonate ore, which means, as opposed to an oxide ore, which most manganese minerals are, which means we don't have to roast it before we can actually leach it. And that has some great environmental and cost benefits. And the fact that it's already previously mined, we don't have to do any blasting, crushing, even grinding. It's all very finely fine-grained material. So all we have to do is excavate it and put it into a slurry and pump it across to our plant. So, but this tailings area today is not lined, and so it's actually a source of pollution by leaching sulfates into the groundwater every day. And one of the benefits of our operation is that as we excavate this material and we put our tailings back to the same place, we will properly line and cap that our tailings, and that will stop that ongoing pollution into the area. So it's quite a unique project. It's as much a recycling and a reclamation project as it is a manganese mine.
Interesting points. And I'm curious, what would the grade be from the tailings and how consistent is it?
So it's very consistent. It's relatively low grade, so we're at 7.5%. But one of the very first steps in our process is magnetic separation. So we can reject 60% of the mass and more than double the grade of the material. So we process about 15% manganese in our plant.
And how many tons will you process annually?
So we'll put in about 1 million tons of tailings per year into the plant and produce about 50,000 tons of manganese metal equivalent. We actually produce it as a manganese sulfate, and 1 ton of metal goes to 3 tons of sulfate, and so we will produce about 150,000 tons of sulfate equivalent.
It's amazing you can produce such a profitable metal from the tailings of a past producing mine.
Yeah, but you know, not having to really have a mine, develop a mine and all that associated mining equipment and crushing and grinding means that, you know, it's a very low cost operation from a mining perspective. It's I think even below 5% of our overall costs. So that helps us make it economic.
So a big part of the Euro Manganese story is the processing of these tailings. You currently have a demonstration plant, and eventually you're going to move that toward a commercial plant. Can you just tell us about this process?
So we've done runs in a pilot plant where we deliver kilograms of product to potential customers. But now we're going to a plant which is about 100 times bigger. Our demonstration plant has been shipped to the Czech Republic, so it's on site, and we're now starting to commission that plant. And then obviously the commercial plant, we're at feasibility study stage for that plant.
Matt, I'm glad you brought up the feasibility study that was released in July of 2022. Why don't we touch on the economics associated with the feasibility study, net present value, internal rate of return, and then touch on the CapEx.
Okay, yeah. The feasibility study was completed in July, and I was very pleased with the economic analysis. It shows that on a base case our net present value post-tax is $1.3 billion. On our upside case, that moves to $1.8 billion. Internal rate of return for the base case is about 22% ungeared, and robust margins in the economic analysis as well. The capital cost is $757 million US. There is over $100 million of contingency in that number, and also given that it was priced in Q2 this year in Europe, it was a high price environment. For example, steel and concrete were quite high. We are seeing steel come down in price in Europe now, so that should help with the economics. And we're also planning to do a short piece of value engineering once we start the engineering, procurement, construction process.
You mentioned the CapEx is $757 million, and a big part of the Euro Manganese story is the project financing. Maybe you can touch on that and tell us exactly how you're going to finance this project.
Yeah, so we've appointed Stifel out of London as our debt advisor. They have modelled the project from a full debt perspective, and it's showing very strong debt service cover ratios. What that means is that we can gear the project to 65 to 70% debt. They've had very good discussions with the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, who's our second largest shareholder. They have strong interest to be a cornerstone debt provider. They've also had good conversations with the European Investment Bank, and we fit squarely into the mandate that the EIB has to support the energy transition in Europe. And so between those two, we expect the majority of the debt to be funded. We're also having good conversations with the export credit agencies, ESG-focused funds, and also the typical project commercial banks. So I think the debt is very well supported. So then that will leave the 30% or 35% equity perspective to be financed. And what we're looking to do there is to have a partner from the industry, ideally an automotive OEM, invest in the project at project level. That will enable us to receive capital cash from that investment, let's say 10 to 20% of the project. That OEM will then also be funding their share of the project from an equity perspective. And with that equity investment into the project level, should also re-rate the stock. So then we'll go out to some the public markets and also some other strategic private placements at the corporate level. And we feel that that's the best strategy to re-rate the stock and avoid dilution, a significant dilution for the current shareholder base.
And this is the trend that we've seen in the last couple of years. OEMs are going straight to the source and entering into these either an equity investment or an offtake agreements.
Yes, and so the equity investment would be linked to an offtake agreement for the OEM. And you're right, they're really they recognise that their weakest link in this transition to a new technology is the raw material supply for the battery metals. And so they're moving upstream to secure that supply, and they're even moving upstream to build their own battery plants as well.
Matt, given that you are processing the tailings from a past producing mine, does Euro Manganese have any liabilities or environmental liabilities associated with this project?
No, we don't. The environmental liabilities are held by the government. When Czechoslovakia broke up between the Czech Republic and Slovakia, the government took over all industrial environmental liabilities at that time. So we don't have any liabilities on that plant site.
Matt, another element to the Euro manganese story is the potential to produce high purity manganese in Quebec. You just came out with a press release on this in late 2022. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
So in Quebec, there is an industrial battery park being created in a location called Bécancour. In there you have GM POSCO, BASF, and Ford has also been associated with it, but they haven't announced anything just yet. What we're going to do is examine the option of taking an intermediate product from the Czech Republic, which is a high purity metal, into Quebec, into Bécancour, and we're completing a scoping study on what we call a dissolution plant. And that will take that metal, dissolve it in sulfuric acid to produce the sulfate that those cathode active material plants, GM POSCO and BASF, require. And because we're located in the same place, we can actually skip some of the end processes of crystallization, drying, and the idea is to pipe that material directly to those plants. Actually, Vale, the nickel company, has just announced a 25,000 ton agreement with GM POSCO at Bécancour, where they're going to do exactly the same thing. They're going to take the nickel into metal, into Bécancour, dissolve it there in sulfuric acid, and pipe the nickel sulfate to these plants. So it's a very exciting opportunity. It's optionality for us at the moment. And like I said, we're just completing a scoping study, which should be completed by the end of this year. And it allows us to address that North American market with local production, which is potentially very important from an Inflation Reduction Act incentive perspective. And it also gives us almost like a bridgehead to a longer term strategy of building a fully integrated North American supply chain alongside our European integrated supply chain.
Matt, the province of Quebec has done an excellent job of embracing the battery metal sector. Maybe you can just speak to some of the incentives that they have offered various companies to start production in the province of Quebec.
The Quebec government has a division called Investment Quebec, and they have a very structured program of financial support that they're offering these to build this battery hub in Bécancour. And the incentives could be up to 25% of your capital costs in various different forms. But that's obviously, a significant advantage. It's not only that, but Quebec has, particularly Bécancour, 100% renewable power, hydropower, at a very low cost. It's got a good, sophisticated local qualified workforce, great rail and road infrastructure down into the US to service that US market. So it has a number of advantages about why Bécancour is attracting all of these companies. And I'm sure that Quebec has going to develop other sites as well to build out this battery industry.
Matt, as we wrap up, maybe you can summarize for investors on what they can expect in terms of news flow here in the coming months.
I think the near-term news flow is our demonstration plant, which we're commissioning now. We're looking to produce on-spec material from that plant in Q1. Alongside that, we've put out our EPCM, Engineering, Procurement, Construction Management tender documentation. We're receiving bids in December and looking to appoint that contractor in Q1, probably towards the end. That will allow us to start our basic engineering and procurement strategy for long lead time items, for example, in Q2. Permitting, we're submitting our EIA very shortly. That's a 6-month process. Once we receive that approval, we can then submit our land planning and construction permit. So that's again a 6-month process. So we have about 12 months permitting in front of us, but I'm not concerned about getting those permits given the ESG characteristics of the project. I think one of the most important upcoming events will be announcing our offtake contracts. We are in a fairly structured process at the moment, and we've received indicative bids from multiple parties along the value chain. We're now driving those towards term sheets and then offtake contracts into Q1, Q2. That will allow us to then put that financing in place that we spoke about from both a debt and equity perspective.
And I'm sure when that news becomes public, you're going to see a significant re-rating in your stock.
I think that's a real opportunity. I think the stock is quite low cost, at the moment. There's a lot of value to be delivered in this next year, and I think the stock will re-rate to reflect that.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you very much for being with us today and for educating us on the importance of high purity manganese in the lithium-ion batteries. Once again, thank you.
Thanks very much, James.